No Down Payment is a drama from 1957. Jeffrey Hunter and Patricia Owens are a newlywed couple who move into a middle-class suburban neighborhood in California. They settle in and meet their neighbors, but soon they realize not everyone's life is as idyllic as it looks, specifically with the three families living closest to them, played by Pat Hingle and Barbara Rush, Tony Randall and Sheree North, and Cameron Mitchell and Joanne Woodward. I'll just say it now, this is one of the most shocking films I've seen from the classic Hollywood era. It tackles several taboo topics that were controversial back then, like alcoholism, racism, overt sexuality, capitalism, and post-war angst. Which, yes, this isn't the first film to explore these ideas, but this is the earliest film I've seen that's had this blunt of an approach to depicting these themes. Many movies during the classic Hollywood era were restricted by the code, and had to insinuate or dance around risque subjects, but this one doesn't do that very much. So much so that I'm genuinely curious how they got this all past the production code. For example, when Tony Randall's character gets drunk, he gets flirtatious and even starts hitting on his friends' wives, and he isn't really punished for his actions. Sure, someone steps in and stops him, but honestly, it feels like it was easier for the characters to just let him get away with it. In most Hollywood films, Randall would be punished to some extent, but it never really feels like he is. Promiscuous actions were almost always stopped by the censors, but not in this case apparently. And honestly, that's part of why I find this film fascinating. There are even more elements in this that go against the Hollywood code. You're so used to seeing the typical bad behavior gets punished formula that when a movie doesn't follow it, you're pleasantly surprised. It feels like the film is allowed to be more honest when commenting on these topics. Obviously, there's some good old Hollywood melodrama in there, but it really doesn't deter from the power of the story. The material is expertly handled, and the overall film has aged very well. Something I really like about this movie is the look. Visually, everything looks perfect. Oh, I don't mean the cinematography. I mean the neighborhood itself. It looks spotless. Everywhere you turn, it looks clean and pristine. There's a uniformity to the community due to the cookie-cutter designs of the houses, right down to many of the interiors. But even though you're looking at the same architecture over and over again, you never feel bored. I think a big reason for that is due to the blocking of the performers. Director Martin Ritt did an excellent job staging his actors in every scene. There are lots of long takes where we see the characters move almost freely around the space, and use their bodies to create interesting compositions. I think if a less talented director was given this material, it would come off as stagey and bland. But that's not the case, and we have a film that's more visually interesting than I think people give it credit for. The setting isn't great just from an aesthetic standpoint, but from a thematic one too. I love the contrast between the residential paradise and the flawed characters. Many stories have this commentary and tend to come off as preachy, but this film doesn't. It never feels like it's trying to teach you something. It more shines a light on some undesirable aspects of American life people didn't want to acknowledge. Again, you don't see too many films from the 1950s doing that. The script also does a great job balancing all the characters and plot lines. The characters are well defined and interesting. There's never a character I feel ruins the dynamic. Everyone contributes to the plot, and taking out just one of them would take away from the quality of the story. Probably the strongest aspect of the film are the performances. This is one hell of an ensemble. I was familiar with all the key actors beforehand, but I was never this impressed with them. They all bring so much to their performances that I honestly can't pick one standout. I was originally going to highlight all of them, but that's 8 actors to research. So I'm going to briefly talk about each of the couples and mention any interesting tidbits about their careers/personal lives. I know Jeffrey Hunter, Tony Randall, and Joanne Woodward are all very well-known actors, and this year's set of reviews are supposed to highlight underrated performers, but it feels weird not to include them. First up is Jeffrey Hunter and Patricia Owens, the new couple. They start out as the catalyst for the viewer, introducing all the conflicts through their eyes. However, as the film goes on, we slowly start to see they have problems they're dealing with. Hunter is an engineer who loves his job, but doesn't make enough money. He has an opportunity to transition into sales and make more money, but he knows he'll be miserable. Owens naturally wants him to make the big leap so they can have some more financial stability, but Hunter thinks he should have a bigger say in the matter since he's the only one working. Their conflict is understandable from both sides, but the more the issue comes up, the more they seem to get on each other's nerves. The gradual escalation of their argument feels realistic, and they never get so intense where it comes off as over the top. They do a great job bringing a sensitivity to their bickering. Like, they know they need to bring up some harsh stuff, but they still don't want to hurt each other's feelings. They bring enough subtleties to their performance to where you can tell they understand each other's perspective and don't want to have the conversation. They just want what's best. It just so happens they both have a different idea of what's best. They also do a wonderful job feeling out of place. When they move in, it takes them time to loosen up around everyone. Even though everybody is so inviting, they sense the troubles that are brewing behind the scenes. It's relatable, and it's that relatability that makes them so enticing to follow. Both Jeffrey Hunter and Patricia Owens were contract players at 20th Century Fox at the time. They were discovered by the studio while performing in plays and offered long-term contracts. Hunter was already a leading man by the time he starred in this film, but Owens was just starting to get noticed by critics. The year before this, Hunter was catapulted into stardom because of his supporting role in The Searchers. The year after this film, Patricia Owens would star in her most memorable role in The Fly. For some reason, after that film, her career started to peter out. She retired from acting in 1968 after a string of unsuccessful movies and a few television appearances. She passed away from cancer on August 31st, 2000. She was 75 years old. Jeffrey Hunter had a string of successes in the early 60s, including Hell to Eternity and the Technicolor remake of King of Kings. But I think most people remember him as Captain Christopher Pike in the original Star Trek pilot The Cage. Hunter's career was cut short on May 26, 1969, when he suffered an intracranial hemorrhage while walking down some stairs. He cracked his head open and needed some surgery, but it was unsuccessful and he passed away the next morning. Some have linked the hemorrhage to a concussion he received the year before while making a movie. He was in a car rigged next to an explosion. It was supposed to blow away from him, but it ended up blowing into him. We'll never know for sure if that was the cause of the hemorrhage, but what we do know is that his career was cut off way too soon. He was 42 years old when he passed. The next couple is Tony Randall and Sheree North. Randall is an alcoholic salesman who's always coming up with get-rich-quick schemes, which always backfire. They're at a point in their marriage where his actions are starting to cause irreparable damage. The whole time, you empathize with North's frustrations. Every look of disappointment she gives him paints a history of anguish between them. She tries her best to hold everything together, but you can tell she can't hold out any longer. She holds out for a bunch of reasons, namely for her social standings, kids, and him. You can tell she still loves Randall. After everything he puts her through, you can tell she still yearns to go back to the way things used to be. North brings all of this to light with just her expressions and mannerisms. She's one of the performers who's underappreciated by most critics, and I think most people should take note of what she's doing. Tony Randall is such a dirtball in this. I know, just say that to yourself. Tony Randall is a dirtball, and he's really good at it, too. He masterfully breaks his typecast in what has to be one of the acting highlights of his career. You just want to slap him every time he's on screen. Even when he isn't drunk, he's despicable. He's a fast talker and always has some dumb trick up his sleeve. Scenes where him and North work off each other are especially powerful. You feel the frustration in the marriage and just want things to get better. Sheree North was groomed by 20th Century Fox to be the next Marilyn Monroe, but she never really caught on, and so the studio moved on to promote Jane Mansfield instead. Not long after this film, her contract with Fox ended, and she transitioned into TV work. Rather than try to be a star, North decided to become a versatile character actress. It paid off, and she had a second wave of success. Although she never headlined a project, she found consistent work from the mid-60s all the way until the early 90s. She passed away on November 4th, 2005, after complications from a surgery. She was 73 years old. Tony Randall got his start acting in plays and made his Broadway debut in 1946. He made it big in 1955 by starring in Inherit the Wind on Broadway as newspaperman E.K. Hornbeck, the role Gene Kelly would play in the subsequent film version. His performance caught the attention of Hollywood, and he soon starred in a string of comedies, often as the funny friend, probably most notably as the friend of Rock Hudson in Pillow Talk, Lover Come Back, and Send Me No Flowers. He continued to have success in films, but he would become a household name after starring as Felix Unger in the successful 1970s TV series The Odd Couple, based off the Neil Simon play. And honestly, Randall continued to have success throughout the rest of his life. He passed away due to pneumonia on May 24th, 2004. He was 84 years old. Up next is Cameron Mitchell and Joanne Woodward, the most volatile of the couples. They were married too young and hold repressed resentment for each other. As the movie progresses, their true feelings come out in an explosive fashion. They love pushing each other's buttons, and oftentimes that leads to some very uncomfortable moments. It reminds me of that one couple who will always get into an argument at a party, and everyone else just kind of sits there and watches. It's ugly, but you can't look away. Woodward does a great job playing a rambunctious housewife who just wants to feel some emotional support from her husband, but never gets any. She plunges herself into vices like alcohol and sex, but you can tell it doesn't do much. There comes a point where she can't suppress her unhappiness anymore. There are times where she goes off on her husband, and you just can't believe the grit she has. Mitchell plays a man who feels his glory days are behind him. He's a decorated veteran of the Second World War and always reminisces about his successes. Now he's a mechanic, and he has trouble coming to terms that this is going to be the rest of his life. Like, he went overseas, killed men, saw his friends die in some of the bloodiest conflicts of all time. Now he's told, go work a 9-to-5 and be a nobody. Have fun. It's one of the few movies I've seen that explore a select group of veterans who feel hollow on the inside. We understand his frustrations, but we're also kind of frightened by his desire to go back into the carnage. On paper, Mitchell is probably the most interesting character, and I could have done my highlight on just him, but I stand by everyone brings something great to this film. Cameron Mitchell actually did fight in World War II, but started acting on Broadway before the war. war. He made his debut in 1939, and after the war, garnered a contract with MGM. He starred in movies and plays congruently throughout the 1940s and 50s, and is probably most well known for originating the role of Happy Loman in Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman. By the beginning of the 60s, Mitchell had run into some financial troubles and started starring in anything that was offered to him. He soon became synonymous with TV shows and exploitation films. Those are both actually how I first saw him. I'll always remember seeing him in the Night Gallery segment Green Fingers and the slasher movie The Demon. Unfortunately, his financial troubles would persist throughout the rest of his life. He died July 6, 1994 from lung cancer. He was 75 years old. Joanne Woodward got her start in TV. She was mostly in anthology plays like Tales of Tomorrow, Robert Montgomery Presents, and the Philco Goodyear Playhouse. She made her film debut in 1955, and in 1957, the same year as No Down Payment, she won the Academy Award for Best Actress in The Three Faces of Eve. It was her third film. The following year, she married Paul Newman. This was before he became one of the biggest stars of all time. They were married all the way until his death in 2008. Woodward's career went through some ups and downs, but many agree that after the 1960s, she lost some of her star power. She continued to act until she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. At the time I'm recording this, Miss Woodward is the last surviving cast member of the film. The final couple is played by Pat Hingle and Barbara Rush. Their conflict isn't as explosive as some of the others, but it's still interesting. They have conflicting ideas on conformity. Rush thinks that conforming to the status quo will make life less of a hassle, so she tries to blend into the crowd. Hingle cares more about his personal happiness and what he thinks is right, so he doesn't care if he sticks out. They seem to be the most understanding couple. What I mean is that when they argue, they seem to know exactly what to say to one another. Whether they need to be harsh or caring, you get a sense that they've had a history of having to work things through together. They're also appreciative of everything they have. They understand that there are problems with their neighborhood, but they remember how tough life was during the Depression, and that makes them appreciate the amenities they have more. This makes them feel like well-rounded people. They aren't fighting and moping all the time. Sometimes they fight, but other times they live and laugh. Hingle especially feels like the emotional glue for many of his neighbors. There are times where things are going very bad, and Hingle can't help but insert himself in the situation. I don't know what it is, but there's something so endearing about him. He's the type of guy you always want to have your back. I've seen Hingle in a ton of stuff, but I never took much notice of him. This made me want to revisit his filmography, and I realize now that he was a much more talented actor than I thought. Again, I could have done a whole spotlight on Hingle, but like I said before, everyone is integral to the story. Barbara Rush got her start starring in plays for the local California theaters, like the Pasadena Playhouse. Her film career began with two memorable sci-fi films, When Worlds Collide and It Came from Outer Space. Another one of her more memorable roles was in Nicholas Ray's Bigger Than Life. Interestingly, she was married to Jeffrey Hunter from 1950 to 1955. They were divorced by the time they starred in this movie together. In the 70s, Rush started to focus more on theater work. She still made movies, but preferred to work on stage. She retired from acting in 2007 and passed away on March 31st, 2024, a couple days before I started writing this review. She was 97 years old. Pat Hingle got his start at the Actors Studio in 1952. He was later in the original Broadway cast of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. He played Gooper, the brother of Brick. He made his film debut in an uncredited role as a bartender in On the Waterfront, something I never noticed until I started to revisit his filmography. Hingle was rarely given leading roles and ended up becoming one of the most successful character actors of all time. He has too many memorable roles to count, but a few include playing Sally Field's father in Norma Ray, the narrator and Rooter in the original Land Before Time, and Commissioner Gordon in the first 4 live-action Batman movies. He passed away on January 3rd, 2009. He was 84 years old. Like I said, this is a stellar cast, all of which I want to look more into. So if you want to see one of the most shocking films from the 1950s, or want to discover 6 great actors in one film, then I highly recommend No Down Payment.